Welcome to Wellness Radio with Dr. Jeanette Gallagher as your host. Her show discusses topics of health, wellness, and spirituality and is about discovering your place in this great universe from your cells to the cosmos. Along with her guests in casual conversation, she strives to ask the difficult questions that may be holding you back from a vibrant life and shares new ideas that may inspire you to make a change in your life that you only can see in your dreams. And now, here is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Radio. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening. Tonight we are going to be talking about our lives, the process of our mind, the way in which our world unfolds, and that book that we've been given at birth to perhaps say, this is your life, let me see how it unfolds. What happens when the book we've been given is a template of how everything should work? It should go this way. If you bend to the left, you'll get the right results. Is that the way the world really is? What happens when the book we are given no longer works? The way in which other people have constructed their lives doesn't work for us. The answers to our questions no longer fit. Or perhaps we're sitting back and saying, I just need to throw this all up in the air, start from scratch, find some answers, and find those that can help guide me with inspiration, grace, support, and things that will be able to support our lives. What we're talking about today is a mother who really, truly was given that book. And she followed it, and she thought things were right, and this is the way you do it. However, it's time when you have to throw the book away and say, no, something's not right. Things aren't in alignment. I need to do something, and I need to change my focus to be able to support my child. Isn't that a different way we're looking at life? In the year 2023, many people are saying, as we've seen over the past several years, time to stand up, time to take a little bit more control of our lives, having different choices, perhaps even saying, I can't take control, I just need to let it unfold, but I will be there to guide it with grace and the best choice possible. That's what we'll be talking about today. My guest today is Karen DeBonis. Her book is Growth, a Mother, Her Son, and the Brain Tumor They Survived. Karen, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Dr. Jeanette. And that was a wonderfully appropriate introduction. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, Karen, I really wanted to do this book because I think that it encompassed so many different aspects of our lives. As I shared, you grow up and you think everything's going to be fine. We all grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and, life was going to be hunky-dory, and we expected it. But then all of a sudden, over the decades, we kind of got thrown into the meat grinder, so to speak, and it said, well, it's not going to work out that way. Let's see what we can do.
Right,
and don't you think that's where your story was?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I thought I was doing everything right, and I thought I kind of knew what I was doing, as much as any new mom knows what she's doing, with the child. And, and it just didn't work out the way I had thought it would.
Yeah, I was looking back, reflecting on my life, with early life with kids, and I'm going, I was pretty much a nomad, meaning that I didn't have anyone to tell me or guide me or, teach or, answer even questions. I kind of just went along. If, things went to the left, I had to find a way to fix it and then move back to balance. Things went to the right, we had to do the same thing. Do you think perhaps that's the plan we always think in our lives, but really what you're talking about is every time you drifted to the left and you had a question, you got hit with a wall. When you went to the right and you tried a different answer or question, you got hit with another wall.
Right. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I, as you know in the book, I didn't know what to do with that wall. I couldn't, I I let the wall push me back rather than pushing back against the wall to get answers.
But you know what, don't you think, and I really want to give us a free pass here, Karen, both you and I, when we hit those walls, because that's the way it's always been in the past. If you look back at our mothers or our grandmothers, they didn't ask questions. They kind of went along the way. That's the way the world was, you know? I mean, and how many times have we ever heard, don't you dare say that, be quiet, sit down, shut up, this is the way it's supposed to be. And isn't that the way generations have been?
Oh, absolutely. And I learned that from my mother. And my mother was very loving and supportive, but, you know, she was a coming of age as a wife in the, you know, the 50s, and women then didn't question and kind of went along with things. And I learned very well. I learned from a great teacher to my detriment.
Yeah, but also, too, they had a lot of secrets that they never told. They had a lot of stories that they never shared, you know? So really, we look at it, are we humans expanding and learning better now in this year, 2023, versus the past? So what I really think is that we are looking at the past in reflection. We can see what they went through and say, that was a time then, but this is the time now, and create a new story.
Oh, absolutely. And I do feel, I mean, our society has a long ways to go, but I think we have learned that there's value in sharing stories, and that we learn from each other's stories, and we can become better individually and collectively. So I do think that's very different.
Right, because if you look back, I don't know if you grew up like this, but I did, you know, every day sometimes, or every other day at the least, all of the relatives would come together, you know, the women, you know, over coffee or whatever, or outside, or going to get groceries or whatever it might be. But they were always talking. They always had someone to depend on that knew their story, or that was able to help them or support them. If you look now at the years, I don't know about you, but, man, I had nobody to ask. I had nobody around. I didn't live near relatives. And, you know, even in the year 2023, our kids and everybody else are scattered all around. Don't you think we really need to share our stories to get support somewhere?
Oh, I do. And I had a kind of unique upbringing in that both of my parents were only children. So I didn't have that circle of relatives, you know, for support and to create that community. Fortunately, my mom was very much an extrovert and very outgoing, so she had friends that gathered, but it was a little bit different for me. And I do think, and, you know, again, as you know, reading my story, I have not done a great job in my life of creating that circle of support for myself among friends and, you know, a little bit neighbors, but I didn't really, not people that I really felt that I closely fit in with. And so for me, sharing my story and reading other stories is one of the ways that I do grow and get that support.
Right, because really what I look at it as, you have a life of mission of service. You know, I'm like that too. I can honestly tell you, I'm almost 70, and I have probably have zero friends my entire life. It's just been that way because it wasn't important. I was in service. Everything I did had a purpose and an action. And in your life, too, with your child, you had a purpose. You were in service to learn from him how to support him. But he was in service to teach you. So in essence, is that not the greatest mission that we're on at this time?
It is. And, you know, that's really, I never thought of it that way. That's actually very comforting for me to think about it that way.
Well, the reason I said it is because I read the book, you know, and I'm a medium too, you know, and I said, I can see this, you know. Right in the beginning I said you lived a life of compliance, and then you decided compliance didn't work, and then you wanted to try to take control. What does the brain do but take control? So here you were taking more control of the brain because his brain wasn't able to function. Right, you know, we think about that. So were you, in essence, trying to say, if I learn how to finesse the actions of the brain, I can teach him. I can teach him control. I can teach him compliance. I can teach him actions. I can teach him good or perfection or whatever that might be, or to learn how to do this, that, or the other. Yet he was telling you, perhaps, that my brain isn't doing that. I'm learning creatively. I'm learning to be present. I'm learning to guide, even if my actions of controlling mind don't guide me. So really, you were on opposite ends of the paradigm, don't you think?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I agree.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes when we try to find answers and questions to what's going wrong, when your child was starting to not show the signs that he was, as we say, in alignment, that curve that they have to go up, that growth curve, so to speak, and things start to get amiss. We always want to put them in line because they need to be accepted, smart, intelligent, success up that ladder. But when they start to fall off of it, that's when we start to say, what's wrong with you?
Right.
Isn't that when you started to look for what's wrong?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and instead of just accepting that that's where he was at the time, and if I did, I did support him, but I think I could have supported him more. Just kind of accepting that this was where he was at that moment.
I think also too the idea of asking questions. How many times do you have a symptom? And, I've been in healthcare over 5 decades. People come to me and they'll tell me a symptom and I'll have this answer and they'll go, but that's not quite it. And I'll say, I know that's not quite it, but let's dance with this for a minute to see where it will take us. But we definitely know that there are other professionals out there who will say, this is it because that's what I said. And when we meet that resistance, isn't that where you got stuck so many times before getting help for your child?
Oh, dozens and dozens of times, absolutely. Yeah, there was, kind of the doctors had one way of seeing things, and the one doctor, our pediatrician in particular, just, I think her mind just became more and more and more closed to any other possibility, then nothing is wrong.
Yeah. I think also, too, the idea is that if you look at it over the decades, the general practitioner, I know when I grew up in the 50s and 60s, the doctor would come to the house to see us. It was always, he just did. That was the way it was. And then we look at it in the 80s and 90s, there was a huge explosion of specialists in the medical professions. No longer was it just, your primary care person, the regular doctor down the corner, and, hey, go see this guy. He has a little more insight. It was now, when you think about it, when I would send a patient and they would say, I'm having trouble with, my blood vessels, they would say, which ones? In your foot, you go to the foot doctor. In your eyes, you go to the eye doctor. Your heart, you go to the cardiologist. And it was like, really? But they're all connected. They're all the same thing. And they couldn't conceptually understand that. Yeah. And I think when you were sharing the stories with all of these other professionals that were, so to speak, in the web of your child's care, it's pretty difficult to see that, don't you think?
Yes, and I think I've heard the word silos to describe that each specialist works in their own silo, and they can't see beyond that, and frequently aren't willing to even have a conversation with the doctor in another silo. So, and like you said, it's all one. The body is all one system. It's all interrelated.
Yeah, it's so funny because, if you have a blood clot, and blood clots travel, well, they would say, oh, it's not in your leg anymore, so go to see the other one. And it's like, it's just, to me, it's like, are you serious? It doesn't even make sense anymore, So I think sometimes when you're a parent and you're trying to ask for answers, let's talk about the few steps, what happens when your child has symptoms and you're not getting help, I think the first thing is you need to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is, are you hearing my pain?
Yeah.
And are you hearing what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you just hearing what you need to hear because that's all you can prescribe? Which do you think perhaps over the years has been a factor for you?
Yeah, well, I think they were hearing what they wanted to hear, and two things come to mind. One is that saying, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail. You know, so I think each doctor saw kind of what they expected to see. And the other thing is, and I mentioned this in the book, the doctors are taught in medical school, if you hear hoofbeats, look for a horse, not a zebra. And I think each of the doctors was, you know, kind of looking at maybe getting too broad of a picture of what was going on and thinking, oh, this is just, you know, I have so many patients that come to me with these complaints and it's never anything serious and it's just this. Where those hoofbeats got awfully loud before any of the doctors were willing to consider that maybe it was a zebra. Maybe it wasn't something typical.
Yeah. You know, so many times myself and my daughter, who's an ER physician, we both have the medium, you know, being a medium, and we can kind of pick up, and we look and see pieces of zebra almost in everything, you know what I mean? So we have a different perspective, but I definitely understand that when you go through the medical professions, they have to now in the year 2023, they can't go outside of any prescribed template, so to speak. So let's talk about now when your voice gets bigger, who is the one that's going to speak up for the child? Is it going to be that you have to keep pushing and going to other professionals? Do you sit back and say they know better, which you and I know, we've seen that in the past. Parents, even ourselves, you know, will say, well, the doctor must know. You know, we're going, oh, good Lord. You know, and you just want to step back and say, you know, you just kind of close your eyes and just say, let me off this ship because this isn't where I need to be to get help for my children, don't you think?
Right. And I think for me, what the realization that I came to was that, yes, a number of the different behaviors that he was displaying were within the ballpark of quote-unquote normal, you know, developmental behaviors, but they weren't, again, I hate that word normal, but for lack of a better term, they weren't typical for my son. They were drastically different. And I think that's the point that I missed myself, you know, within my own self-doubt. I missed that for a few years, and then finally when I kind of had that realization, that's when things, you know, kind of started to move a little bit more quickly in the right direction.
What about the idea of denial? Because when we really start seeing symptoms, we say, oh, no, it can't be that. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm making too much out of it. Maybe it's not quite the truth. When in essence, it perhaps is the truth. And sometimes people will say, oh, you're just basing that on your fear. You must have heard it or saw it or someone else told you. So now you're afraid and you're conjuring up these symptoms. When in essence, I think, let's talk about the next step is observation and presentation. I think if we can step back out of the emotion sometimes and say, what is it, where is it, what is it doing, and see it for what it is, then perhaps we can use that in a context and a form to get help. Maybe?
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I like that. I certainly didn't have that awareness before, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Also, too, I think the idea is that what do you do? I mean, I know I've had this before. I've got 4 kids, and I'm sure you've had it. This crazy lady is here again.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, how many times do we hear that in an office? The crazy lady is here again. She's trying to force something. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And we know that happens in professions.
Right.
I mean, we cannot deny it. We're not going to stand here and say it doesn't. It does. It happens on a daily basis in healthcare. And how do you get past that?
Well, let me just say that somehow I had that awareness that I had to be really careful about how I presented both myself and my concerns, because I sensed that once that label was slapped on me, things were going to grind to a halt. And it's really tricky for parents. I think, unfortunately, mothers especially. And nowadays, how they refer to that is medical gaslighting, where, doctors just stop listening and also start, kind of making the patient think that they are crazy or unhinged or whatever. So in terms of the next step, I don't know. I'd have to really think about that.
Yeah. Let's talk about the idea you always share in your book. You say, I'm fine. And immediately my sense went up and I heard, stay out. I think when we use the word I'm fine is that we don't want others to be able to get into what is in our heart, our soul, our mind, and our thoughts. And we're just putting up that wall even bigger. Do you think perhaps that was the way you did it many times?
Oh, completely. Because in my head, if someone new, including my husband, my parents, the friends that I had, if they knew what I was really thinking, they wouldn't like me, or they would reject me. So it was kind of self-preservation, but it was very ineffective.
Yeah. I think also, too, I thought an interesting part, you shared in your book, you said, with dreams of becoming a child psychologist, I majored in psychology, and that your husband majored in architecture. And I wrote on the top of the page, left brain, right brain.
Yes.
So in essence, being from both sides, perhaps when you have a child that has concerns with their health of their brain, it could be ADD, ADHD, it could be bipolar, it could be seizures, it could be tumors, it could be anything. We truly have to look at it affects both sides of the brain. So in other words, you're going to have to come at it at a creative side, what's going on there, and the logical side, what's going on there. So in essence, did you and your husband have a united front in providing and seeing both sides, or did there come a clash?
Oh, we did. We were not a united front at all. Not until, very close to the time of my son's diagnosis, and that was a 3-year period between the time when his symptoms started and when he was diagnosed. So, no, we didn't. We weren't united. We weren't really hearing each other or communicating in a way that the other person was going to hear. And I do think, speaking of denial, I had some of that, but I think my husband was really, really just stuck in not being able to fathom the possibility that his son, wasn't going to be the, baseball playing, A+ student. And so, so I think all of that was going on.
He wasn't going to fulfill the picture that he had in his mind, right?
Correct.
But again, that goes back to our mind again, right? So our mind, our brain, and it's sort of like that's how I see your son perhaps teaching your husband, that the picture that you put there isn't me. Can you see me? Yeah. And when you step back, you say, no, I can't see you. I only see what I project to be you.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting that you say, that my son could teach my husband, because I do think my husband, the title of the book is Growth, and of course that applies to a growth in the brain and also the personal growth that a person goes through when you're dealing with something like this. And my husband grew tremendously, not just through this experience, but even, in fact, not even as much in the particular experience of my son being diagnosed with a brain tumor, but in the years since then, I think my husband continued to grow and expand his mind and be able to, open his mind to the possibility that things could be different than the way he sees them.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about the idea when you say about the dog, and he said about either he or the dog was going to go.
Yes.
And I wrote on the page, one more person to take care of.
Oh, in terms of the dog?
Yeah. And it was one more thing to take care of. And it was sort of like, don't show me any other failure, because what is a dog? A dog is something that you cannot control. You don't have, expectations. It's just a dog, and a dog is free-flowing and creative and unexpected, and you never know. So in essence, the dog was a reflection of your child's energy, and your husband just said, I can't deal with it. It's too much. Perhaps?
Yeah, that's interesting. And sometimes I look back and I think, and I was the one that instigated the whole idea of getting a dog for our family. But I was always so overwhelmed with, working full time and raising 2 kids, and then the particular needs of my older son as he was going through this, health crisis that we didn't know what it was. And then I wanted to introduce a dog into the picture. What was I thinking?
Yeah. Well, in essence, it kind of gave children an ease way out, though, to be able to connect. And you're saying, no, I don't want you to connect like that, because then you might be afraid they might be like them. They might not learn, might not be intelligent, might not be successful, maybe won't have kids and climb that ladder or whatever. And I think that's a super intense fear that parents really see right in front of them. Perhaps?
Yeah, that's interesting.
What about the idea of control and fix? Because, it took a long time for you to get a diagnosis. It took a long time for you to get some help and support. And it's not something that you fix and it's back to normal. It's not something that you can control and say it'll never happen again, or it can't happen and tell me how to do it. So in essence, do you give up, or do you follow along and just learn and live the best possible quality of life?
Yeah, and I think that's what I chose to do was, I had made a commitment, as you know, in the book, there was a time, and I'm sure many moms face this, where you kind of feel like, I can't do this anymore. This is too much.
Right.
This is not, this whole parenting thing is just, wow, I'm not up to this. And, I made a commitment to keep my commitment. And so, yes, my son had a very long recovery, and probably still is in recovery now at age 36. Oh, dear, almost 37, wow. And, so it's just a commitment to, okay, so we're all in this together, and we're just going to, just see where things bring us. And, I think it often takes a long time. I'm to the point now where I can look back and see the many blessings that came from this whole experience. And, mainly in terms of personal growth, just teaching me what I would not have been taught any other way.
Right, because I truly see it as your son was a gift. He was an angel. He came to you to help expand your awareness, to help you and your husband and your child to be able to say, life can be different. Let me show you how. And he gave you a really, it might have seemed challenging, but he's saying there are other possibilities in the world. There are other things going on out there, and let's go see them. It's just sometimes I think we say we have to have this life, and anything outside of that is not a life. Or we attach a diagnosis to a patient or a person or a child or a loved one, and we say that's them, and it's not them. Your child was saying, this is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
I just have this health concern for my body.
Mm-hmm.
So he wanted you to know him,
right,
not the body.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's absolutely spot on.
Yeah. I think sometimes the idea is that why are we now in the year 2023 becoming so much more aware to say there are different things? I think it's because perhaps mothers, parents, and kids have started to say the old ways don't work anymore, but we've been willing to step up and say, show me, guide me, take me on a different journey. Perhaps?
Oh, yes. I think it's, we're less stuck in that kind of perfectionist model and more, I think we are more accepting of a broader continuum of what makes a person human, and of course they're always valuable,
right.
And I think we are more open-minded collectively to those possibilities.
Right, because if you truly look at it, then you learn it's not about, the body is not who I am. The body is the vehicle that carries the me, And I think sometimes, people have gotten so stuck in the past, they believe the diagnosis, they will say, oh, I know what that looks like, and they expect all of this other stuff to happen. Instead, we're saying, no, they're good. It's got, like your son. I mean, who would ever say a brain tumor, and you said he's 37 now? So it's sort of like, whoa, really?
Yeah.
And people will kind of just stand there and say, tell me more on learning how to love the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the long journey that I was on and continue to be on, is to just accept, accept all the wonderful things about my son, who's, well, and I would say fortunately, but maybe that's a poor choice of words, because whatever he was dealing with right now would still be, would be the opportunity for growth for those around him, including myself. But he did get to the point where he was able to function very well and be independent. But, once the brain is damaged, there's always going to be some, challenges or difficulties. So he experiences what I call hiccups, little problems with short-term memory and that type of thing. And every time we have a little bump in the road, he doesn't live with us. He lives independently now in his own house. But, every time in our relationship we have a little bump in the road, I think to myself, okay, this is, I have something to learn from this. And this is, this is about recognizing his strengths and not getting caught up on these little bumps.
Right, because it truly is about being able to say, it's life. A lot of people want to say, is it going to be perfect? Am I going to get, my health back? I mean, I can't tell you how many times people will come to me, they'll say, I have this diagnosis, I need to be fixed. And I'll say, what is it really that you want? And they're like, I want to be healthy. And I'll say, what does that look like? And they will reflect back 20 years. And I'm going, but that's not where you can be. So now when you're ready to clear that picture and start with a new page, we can learn where you are going to go from here forward. So I think sometimes we get so stuck in that of what the presentation is supposed to be, because if you look at it, you and your child have really taught the healthcare profession too. Perhaps you can go back to those doctors and leave off a copy of the book and say, thank you for being on my journey. They weren't right or wrong. They just didn't know. Right.
Well, it's interesting. I did, and I'm going to have to, I think, expand my mind about that suggestion. I did track down two of the doctors who were kind of they were more supportive and more helpful in us getting answers. And I did give them copies of the book and thank them for, being who they were and where they were at the time in our story, because I think they were really pivotal in what happened. I haven't thought about the other doctors, and this, the story happened quite a while ago, so they may not even be alive or around. But that's a really interesting thought, Dr. Jeanette. I'm going to have to mull that one over.
Right. Oh, I think it's so important, too, because sometimes they would say they may have had an awakening, too, since then.
Mm-hmm.
Or
yeah.
perhaps they may have said, I knew more, but I couldn't do anything about it. I was limited by my practice.
Mm-hmm.
Or they would say, I was limited by my own fears because I've seen it before and it didn't work out. So I think to understand that everyone along the process is growing and learning, instead of saying, you have to know, you have to fix, you have to save. If we take those labels off of people, professionals, and even the patients themselves, then we can truly say, what are we here to see? What are we here to dance with? What are we here to walk through? And look for those who will guide us along. And even so, I think, Karen, is to be really important. You said about the other physicians, they handed you off. They handed you off and they said, I don't know, and they handed you to someone else. That was a wonderful gift also, too, because when we think about it, they said, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't see it. Or even if they argued with you, they allowed you to find someone else. And that is a gift also.
It is. That's a great point. I never thought of it that way, but that's a great point. Probably at every step during the way, it was, the whole experience was leading us to where we needed to be, or where I needed to be in my journey of life to learn what I needed to learn.
Yeah. Yep. I think also, too, we forget that we are not just constructing a garment, a child, putting them together, and wear it forever. Do you know what I mean? I always think of, I have this, it's a tapestry. It's just a piece of material that was woven, and I have it over my window because there's a light outside and it really shines in. So I put it over the window, and then I noticed that on the bottom it started to fray. And I said, I'm not going to cut those threads. I'm going to leave it. And it keeps on fraying a little bit, here and there over the years. And I still keep it there. And the reason is, it's because those threads can be untangled and unchained. And we don't have to keep them in the pattern, because then you use those threads later to create a new. So in essence, whatever you learn, you can let it go, but you can also take something free too and recreate something else. Don't you think that's truly what growth is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. Like letting go of the kind of preconceived notions of what we think life is going to be about, and just being more open to what it is.
Yeah. In closing, Karen, I would always say on the show, I think it's probably 13 years ago I said this on the show, I said, I really think we need to go to the store and grab a bunch of packets of seeds and put them in a bucket, mix them all up and everything, put a bunch of dirt in there, and make what I call seed balls, little balls with seed. And then you drive down the street and you just throw all these balls out randomly in different places on a way you always go. And then you go back every once in a while and you look and you see what's new growing there. And that's what the gift of life is about. Because you have no preconceived ideas. You don't know if it'll survive or not. You don't have any fears. You're not taking control over making sure it does what it's supposed to do. And you don't even know what's going to come up. That's the gift of life, versus saying, I know what I threw out there. It should be season. This should be the season. I have to make sure it's watered. I don't want to throw it under a tree. It won't get sun. All of that talk and that chatter. If we took away all of the talk and the chatter, might we see the gift of the glorious life that we've been given in an unknown way?
Yeah. That's a great metaphor, and also sounds like a fun project. That might be something I'll do just to kind of remind myself of the lesson.
Right. Because I think, really, truly, your book, Growth, if you look back at it, you can go through and pick out maybe a word or two here or there, or phrases, and say that was unknown, that was unpredictable, it didn't control, it just happened. And when we do that, at the end we say, just as you share at the end of the book, the picture of you and your son, isn't that what that's all about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I am, again, blessed that is the picture at the end of the book. You know, just that we got to that point, and that the lessons I learned brought us here rather than, you know, other places. And people have those journeys and have to figure out their own, you know, lessons and deal with their own growth. And and we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. You know, I work so much with patients at end of lifetime, and I say, it's awesome. You have today. Just breathe, because there's nothing else. There isn't anything else, you know. And sometimes people will say, we need to plan for the future. And I'll say, but the future is today.
Yeah.
If the future is your next breath, then what's the point? You know? But we're just so conjured up in our ways of human thinking, is that the future is this grandiose movie story. But if there was no movie story, might we just learn to appreciate today? I'm sure your son, you could teach him, is that the gift you have is today.
Yeah.
You don't know if he's going to make it to 50 or 60 or have kids or do all this other stuff. He only has the gift of today, and that's what you gave him.
Yeah. It's a great idea. Well, I'm going to, you know, suggest that he listen to this interview and see what he takes from it. Yeah.
Because whatever it is, it'll be a gift from him, you know, because he's got something more that he wants to say. He may turn around and say, this is my story. That's how you saw it. This is how I see it. You know?
Oh, Dr. Jeanette, he actually says that all the time.
Yeah.
And we agree on that. We agree that our stories are different. It has a different focus, different, you know, scenes that we remember. So, and I think for him, he hasn't quite figured out what his story is, but he's, you know, he's in that process.
Yeah, I think it'd be so cool if he just, if you suggest to him just to take a tape recorder. I know those are old things, but take a recorder and say, hey, put a story on here today, and just leave it to the side. And then you just have all of these stories. Because if his gift of today ends today, you have his stories recorded in his voice.
Oh, that's a great idea.
I always share that with people at end of life. Always, record something of people if you can, you know, because then you have that gift.
Right.
It's just a greater gift. You know, I'll say this in closing, Karen, but, you know, when people call, I always let them leave a message on my voicemail. And I've got a list of everyone's voice on my contact list. And I keep it on my phone because I said, that's their voice. I can always go back to that.
Yeah.
You know?
Wow, that's a great idea.
Yeah. So I think, Karen, truly what we talked about today is how we can expand out of our mind, out of our humanness, and maybe find out what we're really made out of. And I think that's a story of your book, Growth. And we thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Oh, Dr. Jeanette, this is a wonderful conversation. I'm really inspired and intrigued, and I'm going to be thinking a lot about this, and great opportunity for me. So I'm really grateful.
So glad to have you. Can you share, Karen, with the listeners how to find out more information about your work? That would be wonderful.
Yes, the best place to go is to my website, which is pretty simple. It's www.karendebonis.com, KarenDeb as in boy, O-N as in S-I, N as in Nancy, I as in Sam. Those are hard letters to hear appropriately. And I have links to the book and my social media handles and more of the story. So I have pretty much everything on that website.
Very good. Well, Karen, it was such a pleasure to have you with us today. And if your son I hope he records and you have that up, and that would be a great asset, and it would encourage others to say, let's share our stories even more from both sides, and just to honor them. And I think that's honoring souls, right?
Right, absolutely. Well, thank you, Dr. Jeanette. I really appreciate this time.
Thank you. If you'd like to find out more information about Karen DeBonis, again, her book is Growth, A Mother, Her Son, and the Brain Tumor They Survived. Please do click on the link on the bottom of today's show page to go directly to her website for more information. And do check it out, because there are so many questions these days we have. How do we open up, release, let go of all of those old truths and beliefs, and be able to step into the unknown? And when you step into the unknown, take a moment and breathe. Open your heart, open your eyes, and just say, I have no idea, but I'm going to let those fears be something behind me, because everything here is just to give me the gift of life. And that's what we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Dr. Jeanette Gallagher. Until tomorrow, have a great day.
Today we discussed many life-changing concepts. Who do you turn to, and how do you know what is best when faced with a health crisis? Dr. Jeanette is a patient advocate. She listens to the patient, the doctors, and the family, clarifies the health issues and concerns, then helps the patient make the best choices going forward. If you would like help implementing change into your life and health, we can talk and see where you are stuck and how to improve the quality of your life. Check the link on the bottom of today's show page, or visit drjeanettegallagher.com to schedule a phone appointment today.